I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with leaders and innovators to make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by Rebecca Volman, SAE Florida Section Chair. On today's episode, we'll discuss Florida's vibrant mobility ecosystem, from ground to air to maritime to space, and the role that SAE Florida plays in connecting all the dots. We hope you enjoy this episode. Rebecca, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
It's great to have you here. There's a lot happening in Florida. What are you seeing in Florida as it relates to the future of mobility?
Oh, so many things. I feel like most of the time when people think of Florida, they're really sort of thinking about kind of the Space Coast. You know, we've got a bunch of different stuff happening in the aerospace industry here. Kennedy Space Center is huge. There's a lot of different things from NASA on the weather end of kind of everything that Florida kind of goes through with hurricane season. And we have so many different racetracks in the state as well, from Homestead Miami Speedway and Daytona International Speedway to a lot of the smaller, dirt tracks and different things that are going on in the world of motorsports, including the historic Sebring International Speedway. So that's really, really cool and really exciting. And then, of course, the biggest reason that everybody comes to Florida is the theme parks. So believe it or not, a lot of the themed entertainment industry has all of the engineering that happens behind the scenes for that. And it's all really cool and exciting.
I was truly amazed. We were speaking with friends that work on that. And you go to Disney World and say, you got to give a high four to everybody's favorite friend, Mickey Mouse. But if you look at Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railroad, that has autonomous engineering in it. You look at various different rides, there's all this engineering that goes into it. How did Florida become this hub of mobility innovation that it is today? Because when you look at mobility innovations, it's a vehicle driving down the road. Oh, it's this. But no, it's putting an autonomous spaceship into space. It's moving individuals around a theme park. It's maritime. It's eVTOL. Florida has all the ingredients, and a lot of it goes back to Henry Flagler and the Florida East Coast Railway, what he did with rail and tourism. But overall, how did Florida become this ecosystem, this vibrant hub of mobility?
Well, I would say that's honestly quite a historic answer. If you've ever visited the Ford Edison estates, they're down in Fort Myers. It kind of shows that, while Detroit became the hub of automotive manufacturing, this is where all of the people vacationed. So that innovation doesn't stop when you're on vacation. And I think that really carried over into much of what we see today. And I think that in general, the kind of population of Florida isn't afraid to try anything new. We're always on that leading edge of innovation, and it's really exciting to see what people want to accomplish here based off of the very diverse population that we have.
The Edison Ford winter homes, I've been there several times. It's fantastic. You had the rubber lab that they worked on all the tires of Firestone, worked on all the tires there. You had Edison's house there. You had Mr. Henry Ford's house there. A funny history thing for our audience, if they're not familiar with it, from those two homes in the lab is where Edison, Firestone, and Ford went on their first trip that they came known as the Vagabonds to build the trust of the vehicles. And they went into the Everglades. Unfortunately, they ran into the elements of the Everglades: snakes, rain, flooding, mud, and they unfortunately had to turn around. But that's where the first Vagabonds trip started from. So if you look at that goes back to the Model T. There's a Model T at the museum if individuals want to go see and visit it. Today, we're phasing out the internal combustion engine globally. We're moving our way towards electric vehicles, and no surprise, Florida is once again leading. Florida is the second state in the country in terms of EV adoption. Why do you think Florida is leading in EV adoption?
I think a lot of it just has to do with, again, saying that we're not afraid to try anything. A lot of where that technology comes from is on the complete other side of the United States, over in California. And one of the big things that we see here is that really to be one of the up and coming states, you've got to be kind of fearless in your ability to try different things out and make sure that from a legal or political standpoint, that we're set up as a state to be able to handle that. So I know that initially, with different things for EVs, everybody's kind of worried about the grid, but Florida's kind of been on the cusp of saying, okay, well, let's also invest money in our electrical grid to make sure that all of that's kind of built out in order to support when, the constituents of Florida really want to make that switch over to EV in a sustainable way.
Outside of the grid, what other infrastructure is needed? Obviously, we have the charging stations that are needed, but is there any other infrastructure, in your opinion, that needs to happen in order for it to continue to scale?
I would say a lot of that, one of the big things is making sure that we also have good, safe response if those vehicles are involved in accidents. So that involves a lot of training for first responders, and kind of seeing, EV fires can burn for, hours and days, much longer than if a vehicle does, get into a catastrophic thermal event like that the people that are supposed to kind of save any individuals that are inside of a vehicle such as that, it would be that they have to approach the vehicle with caution and understand that these lithium ion or any other battery chemistries can be quite dangerous and oftentimes unstable. So I think that there's kind of training that needs to happen with that, in addition to just thinking about thinking ahead. All of these vehicles, they're going to end up into a lot one day or, a scrapyard. And we have to think about that in terms of battery recycling as well, because you can't just, recycle a car the same way if it's an internal combustion car versus an electric vehicle.
Battery recycling is going to be an issue. Governor DeSantis has been very vocal about this, is protecting the Everglades. We're going to have to figure out the microbes that come off of the tires that get into the waterways. That's going to be an issue because the amount of money that we're doing to protect the Everglades. The issue, this was going back to the Governor Scott administration that was talked a lot about, hurricane evacuation. I haven't seen much progress on that, but I hope they're wrong. I repeat, I'm going to say this, I hope they're wrong, but the National Weather Forecast is predicting a very active hurricane season. I hope they're wrong again, and that's not active and it's mellow and quiet. There is a very good chance that Florida is going to have a mass evacuation in certain parts of the state this year. If that happens, and you look at the second largest state of electric vehicles in the country, how are we going to evacuate hundreds of thousands of people in electric vehicles to the theme park capital of the world where everybody evacuates to, Orlando?
Well, I think that that's a really interesting event that could happen. Obviously, if people evacuate, they're going up to northern Georgia, Tennessee. They're going really far away from anywhere that the hurricane could have impact from. And if they, choose to evacuate then in an electric vehicle, you obviously do not have the range to be able to make that, like mid-central South Florida drive all the way up to somewhere that is deemed safe. So I've seen a lot of different businesses are investing in fast chargers so that, if you do have to pull over and charge up on that way, that hopefully you're able to, again, do that in a normal amount of time or a reasonable amount of time. And from there, not only be able to charge up, but also understanding that people need to evacuate in I think people need to evacuate in a reasonable amount of time as well. You don't evacuate the day before a hurricane hits. You have to kind of plan for that in advance. And if the evacuation happens and the hurricane ends up doing a 180 and goes the complete opposite direction of where you originally lived, that's okay. It's still better to be safe than sorry, especially when it comes to your ability to be able to get out at all. I think that the hurricane evacuation routes are definitely capable of handling it, but I think people also need to understand the planning that comes with that. And we're a changing society, and I think that hopefully and eventually that will come.
There's a lot. I mean, we've seen how many historical times where storms come in, look like it's going to wallop the East Coast. It was 2 years ago, I think it was going to wallop Miami. And all suddenly it gets around the Keys and then it ends up in the Gulf. And that was that unfortunate storm that hit Naples, Fort Myers that did all that devastating damage. That was heading for Miami. You just never know. A lot of people, individuals in the state, they go, okay, I'm on the East Coast, I'll evacuate to the West Coast, or I'll evacuate to Orlando. And then unfortunately, we've seen it too many times in history when an individual evacuates to Georgia and the storm ends up doing a direct impact to Georgia. You can't escape it. But my big concern is if you look at the overall penetration of what we have in electric vehicles. I'm an EV owner. The infrastructure is broken. And this is not the state's fault. This is the private sector's fault. So I want to put that out there. It's broken. I was telling you before we started recording here, I went to a charger. I'll omit the company from this. 10 charger stalls, 150 kilowatts. 8 of the 10 were broken. And when I finally got one, I barely got, I think, 45 kilowatts on a 150. In a hurricane situation, this was off the highway. This is not in a remote part. This is right off the highway in a major shopping center. If that's not fixed for hurricane season, we've got a big problem. Do we get to the point where the uptime of EV chargers becomes mandated? There's some policy in place? Because if you're trying to evacuate, say, I don't know, part of Broward County, part of Palm Beach County, part of Miami-Dade County, if all 10 chargers aren't working, I'm going to use a kid's term. We're in a lot of deep doo-doo.
I absolutely agree. I think that the monetization is really what drives that industry for uptime. I think that that's true in any engineering scenario. And if a gas station only had 2 out of 10 pumps working, they're not going to be bringing in the same amount of money. And I think that we need to kind of look at EV chargers in the same way. It should definitely be something that's mandated, the same way that when, every pump has to be inspected by some government official. I don't know their exact title, but there's a sticker on there where if you have a problem with how your fuel was pumped, maybe you fill up your gas car and when you filled up, what you thought was gasoline was actually diesel. Maybe when they were loading the fuel in, that there could have been a mix-up between those two. Now, however rare that may happen, that's why there is a government official in place to kind of do a proper investigation of that and make sure that it's there. But I think that responsibility should also extend to EV chargers, no matter if they're at a fueling station, a rest stop, a coffee shop, anything like that. I think that there does need to be a mandate to make sure that if people expect something to work, it should be there. The same thing is, you want to have those opening times be accurate if you're running a business, and the same should be true for EV chargers.
It's a cabinet position that oversees that. It's a cabinet position. Department of Agriculture that was under Adam Putnam and Nikki Freed. It's a cabinet position. There's a phone number on there. You're a Florida resident, I'm a Florida resident. There's a phone number to call if it's not working. And boy, oh boy, they take that very seriously. Staying on the topic of hurricane evacuation, Florida is an emerging market for eVTOLs, electric vertical takeoff and landing. Vertiports are being built. Is it a case perhaps that we can look to eVTOLs at some point because it's not congesting the roads to move individuals, especially a senior citizen, an individual with a disability that for whatever reason their body can't physically handle sitting in a car for 6+ hours? Can we start to use eVTOLs as a potential way to evacuation in the future, possibly?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And it's, I think that's a great idea. And even just getting better public transportation kind of set up so that when people do need to evacuate, and let's say you don't have a reliable car, what are you really forced to do? You can't rely on your neighbor all the time to say, hey, do you want to take, a 12-hour road trip with me? It's not totally feasible. And I think a lot of times people don't take it seriously enough when you think about, this is, thousands and millions of people's lives at stake when we're hit with these natural disasters. And it's not only the impact when the hurricane first hits, it's about everything that comes after that. Because, it might be, you can flood your internal combustion engine by driving through puddles that are too deep. But what happens if you have a crack in your battery case and you try to run through water? What is that going to look like? Because we deal with flooding quite a lot here in Florida. And while the infrastructure of the state is built to quickly disperse any extra water like that, it still can stand. You know, drains get plugged with leaves all the time. And it's sort of, when we think about the safety of it all, we need to think of not only the initial impact, but the lasting impact of that as well.
That's a very valid point. You know, as the battery's cracked, it's going to corrode and go bye-bye. And the men and women and first responders not going to be able to put it out because the salt water, as we know in Florida, corrodes everything. Florida has a really great regulatory environment that's attracting businesses in all different sectors: finance, mobility, you name it, they're all coming here. What new mobility solution should companies look to deploy in Florida? Should the autonomous companies continue to deploy here? Should a company that wants to invent a really cool race car come here? What new technology should companies look to deploy in Florida?
I mean, I'm biased, so I want to say everything. Bring me all the innovation you can have. I think autonomous vehicles are absolutely great. I'll say that my local mall here, whenever I go shopping, there's a sign up that it is an autonomous vehicle testing area, which never seen that street sign before in my life. So I always think that it's really cool. And I've been able to see the vehicles being tested there as well. I think it's great for, you know, the purpose they use it at the mall is just because walking from one side of the mall to the other is about a mile, and it's pretty extensive. And we have a lot of people in Florida that have limited mobility access because our population here is a lot of retired folk. And because of that, we want to make sure that they're still able to be integrated into society the same way anybody else is. Same with anybody that's disabled. We want to make sure that they have equal access to all of what Florida can offer you, or even just what that shopping mall can offer. So the autonomous vehicle just goes from one side of the mall to the other all day long, and it's perfectly safe. It has a lot of great opportunity for increased mobility of shoppers in that shopping mall. But it's also just cool to see the technology on display and see how people are able to react to it and how much they like it. In addition to that, we've got a lot of cool race car stuff in the area. I know that NASCAR is huge here because we have the two big racetracks, and, you know, Daytona is one of those. Daytona has crown jewel races for the NASCAR Cup Series, and that's really cool to be able to have. But in addition to that, it kind of shows the talent pipeline into NASCAR or other larger race series, because we have the smaller dirt tracks, the Sebring International Raceway that has the really cool historic background of being an air base and having a lot of different, Cup series come there for different race series. And it's so cool to be able to see that innovation and what they really bring to the area. But it's also great for testing all year round. Detroit may be the automotive capital for vehicle manufacturing, but we have, everything from Formula SAE teams that are up in, Canada and northern US. They'll come down to Florida when they have to do testing because it's simply too cold or too icy, or the conditions are just not viable to do race car testing or performance vehicle testing all year round. Whereas Florida, we have the opposite extreme of that. We will make sure that your car never overheats if you design it down here in Florida.
That's true. On the heat, you left out the most important part of the autonomous shuttle. It's air conditioned. That's the most important part.
Yes, it is. And it's, I've ridden it myself. It's an absolute joy to partake in. And it's really cool to see the innovation that comes out of that.
Not on the cool side, but on the practical side, it's building public acceptance and trust of autonomous vehicles. So when members of your community go to the mall, they can experience this technology that's going to be a groundbreaking and impact their lives in all of society. And I'm going to go back to theme parks, because you look at theme parks. The theme park capital of the world in Orlando, you have Disney World, you have Universal. On the Tampa side, you have Busch Gardens. Individuals from all over the world, not just the country, come to Florida to as I said, give Mickey Mouse the high four and go see Harry Potter over at Universal. They got to see their friends. Everybody has to have friends. And so I have this whole theory around introducing autonomy in the theme park environment because it helps to build public trust. You come from Australia, you come from Canada, you come from Europe, you meet Mickey Mouse and you ride an autonomous vehicle. How are theme parks, in your opinion, thinking about autonomy, or how should they think about integrating autonomy into their operations for the guest experience, not from the behind the scenes, but for the guest experience?
I personally think it's a great idea. I know that I guess I'll first tackle it from a different perspective of just the employees. I think a lot of people, when they go to visit the parks, they love the interaction that they get with different employees. And a lot of people sort of worry that autonomous vehicles are going to really take that interaction out of that. They don't have somebody to ask a question to or to feel safe. But I think a lot of times it's as soon as you realize that, okay, everyone else seems safe about it, have that conversation on board or even over an intercom system. And you can integrate so much with even just having, like, if somebody does have a question, you can put an AI kind of chatbot sort of feature into that, which I think would be really cool. But overall, I think that you're exactly right. The more you expose people to autonomous vehicles, for example, or any new innovative technology that many people may first deem of as something that, it's cool, but maybe it's not for me, or it's a little bit scary. I'm not sure if I want to try that myself. If you put it into an environment where people are like, oh, like, I'm just here to have fun, if they're doing it, the safety that you have to go through to make sure a roller coaster passes inspection is admittedly a lot more than it takes for even just your regular car on the road every day. So if you were okay with driving to Disney, why wouldn't you be okay with trying an autonomous vehicle at Disney? So it's one of those things, and I think that they can absolutely integrate it as a way that's sort of fun for people to get involved with.
Disney has a trust factor. If you look at autonomous solutions and the interaction with people, the gentleman or the lady driving the Jungle Cruise, she's not driving it, she's acting. And, gotta avoid the waterfall. It's on a track. It's floating itself down, and gently down the stream we go, merrily, merrily, merrily. It's going by itself, and that individual's there telling a story, because if the individual actually had to drive the Jungle Cruise boat, they'd have to pay attention. They couldn't act. It all goes into the magic of Walt Disney. That's a boat where Florida's a peninsula, so we're surrounded by three sides on water. What innovations are you seeing around maritime transportation happening here in the state?
Oh, well, we have some really great companies in the state of Florida that are kind of pushing the limits of high performance maritime vehicles. Honda has its R&D facility out in the Palm Bay area, and they're really able to do a heck of a lot there with making some of the fastest boats in the world in some of the smallest packages. Instead of having, these big yachts that you see down in Miami or, even Tampa Bay ports, something like that, you end up seeing a lot of them having like 4 different engines on the back, and they all make, let's say 250, 300 horsepower. And you've got to be able to have 4 different engines to power something like that from an outboard vehicle standpoint. But they've been able to kind of put the same amount of power into just one engine. And that gives immense potential for the speedboating industries, any type of maritime racing that they do. We've got different races that kind of go actually the entire, like a big U shape from, I believe it's Tampa to another bay on the east side, but you've got to be able to race around the entire peninsula of Florida, which is just so cool to be able to see, and miraculous that everyday people are able to kind of compete in a race like that. But it's a matter of being able to have these vehicles that can traverse those types of waters safely and also do it really, really quickly. It's amazing. And then from there, we also see a lot of, I think innovations that will begin to happen with, I would love to see an autonomous boat. I'm sure that cruise ship industries are starting to kind of explore that route as well.
On the leisure side, it's the docking and undocking. And we're looking at from autonomously docking and undocking, because that's a dangerous part of when you're learning how to be a boat captain, is the undocking. And then we are starting to see some really interesting things around decarbonization happening in the cruise ship industry. A lot of that's being done down in Miami. We're really fortunate to be this great hub. And then we also have all of our ports, the port of Everglades, the port of Miami. You're starting to see really interesting things done around automation in the port. And then there's what we're known for more than there's theme parks and the shuttle. We're known for the Space Coast. We're known for the Kennedy Space Center, which is a fantastic place to take your children. And now SpaceX is actively operating there as well. And it's actually the really interesting fun fact: largest runway in the United States is the Kennedy Space Center. And another fun fact: if you're an amateur pilot, you can call ahead and radio ahead, and you can do a touchdown and touch up. That's a lot. Another cool, interesting little fact there about Florida. So SpaceX is here. Blue Origin is there. NASA's there. Remember, we can go see E.T. Or I'll give you another good one from being a kid. The Flight of the Navigator, that was filmed there, and that was really, really, really good. Are you seeing any increase in the space exploration technology and engineering because of the revival of the Space Coast?
Oh, absolutely. It's honestly amazing because when I was in college from 2016 till 2021, I came into college and I was fully sold on the automotive engineering idea, but I took my own little stint in aerospace, working in research for hypersonic materials. And I thought that was incredibly cool to sort of see everything that I learned about aerodynamics in a vehicle and how different it is when you're, launching something into space, because you go through a vast change in atmospheric conditions, because you're going from, ground level on Earth here, where we're pretty much at sea level down by the ports. And then you're going into space, which is a completely different thing. You're going through, tens of different atmospheres at that point. And breaking at that point, I think offers a new challenge for people in an engineering space to really think about, okay, at any given moment, there's no constant for environment. And when you're thinking about that from the point of, okay, what forces then act on a vehicle, it's really cool to be able to see that. And I think that it really added to my academic career as a student. And I think that it's only continuing to grow for current students. We've got a lot of people that are in SAE that are thinking, okay, I want to explore more of the aero side of things. And, I know from my college alone, we've got the majority of people that are employed at NASA, the Kennedy Space Center, are actually graduates from UCF, which is really cool to be able to see and, have that little win for our alumni that work there. And it's absolutely astounding what they're able to accomplish.
That's wild. I had dinner with a retired Air Force officer a couple nights ago, and he was we start talking. Oh, what's your favorite movie? I said, I like the right stuff. I like the right stuff. And he said, I'm a test pilot. And I said, how fast have you gone? He goes, I've done Mach 7. Everything over that's classified. I said, holy smokes. But it's incredible the different things that are happening here. So you attended UCF, and there you were introduced to SAE at UCF, and that's for our listeners. That's the University of Central Florida. What initially attracted you to SAE?
So I was in my first week as a undergraduate student sitting in my intro to engineering class, and I was shown this phenomenal video that exposed me to what our SAE collegiate chapter did, which was partaking in the Formula SAE and Baja SAE collegiate design series competitions. And I thought, oh my God, that's exactly what I've wanted to do. And I think that it's the perfect kind of specialization that I wanted to pursue within mechanical engineering. So I, went out to one of their new member nights to just meet everybody that was involved in the club and the leadership and see more about what they do and what their goals for improving their vehicle and what they do in terms of professional development. And I knew immediately that I had found my people and fit in. And I, ended up coming up with my own goal of being leadership of the club one day. So that's what originally hooked me in, and I am glad that I never looked back.
So prior to joining the club, you had a mechanical engineering background. Did you tinker with things? Did you build things? How did you get there?
Yeah, so I actually worked at a auto body shop or automotive repair shop, and I I guess originally I had built my own car and I kept track of that process through Facebook, and I really engaged with my local community because of that. There was nobody in my family that was really interested in cars at that point, to the extent of actually working on them. But I was dragged to a bunch of car shows when I was little and loved looking at classic cars. But, when you're 16, you're definitely like, I want to go fast. So I became obsessed with understanding the performance of different vehicles and keeping track of the build that I did on my Mustang through just Facebook and other social media updates. I couldn't figure out why the car couldn't start. And I ended up posting about it on Facebook, and somebody asked if I had hooked up a diagnostic computer to it. And that individual ended up becoming my coworker, because after he had cleared a theft code that I had somehow tripped on the vehicle, I ended up saying, I was like, you know what, he told me that I was very capable and that I should go for a job at the shop that he worked at. So he introduced me to his boss, and she was a phenomenal woman who was really empowering for women in male-dominated fields. And I knew from that point on that I definitely was, capable of accomplishing something. And the more I worked on these cars, I realized that I kind of wanted to design them better, because I became very frustrated doing a few jobs as a mechanic. And from then on, I realized engineering sounds like the perfect path. I had never known an engineer my entire life, but I figured it sounds like engines in the name, so I should be pretty good at it if I can tinker on an engine. And from there, I decided at that point I was going to be a mechanical engineer, and I just kept going with that dream. And I really can't imagine myself doing anything else in life.
You got your Zoom mobile.
Absolutely.
So what you described, you had all the you had the network, Facebook, the relationships to open that up. And I'm going to put on my chef's hat here. You had all the ingredients to build something special. Florida's building something special as it relates to the future mobility. You're sitting there, you're rolling your sleeves up. What role do you see SAE Florida playing in this bowl of ingredients, or kitchen of ingredients of all things mobility? And it's not just ground, it's air, it's maritime, it's space, because engineering touch all aspects of our lives, and SAE is in this beautiful position to sit right in the middle of it. So you can be the head chef for this. What role did you want SAE Florida to play here?
Honestly, if I were to boil it down to one thing, the overall goal is really just to empower our future generations of engineers. We have this great network of people that even they're retired, but they have years of experience. They're the ones who built the industry up for exactly what it is. 50 years ago, Florida looked very different, and so did the engineering industry. So being able to learn and build off of that experience and kind of pass that down to our future generations is definitely my key goal with SAE. No matter what kind of facet of engineering a student may want to go into, or even before they get to college, because we do a whole lot with the A World in Motion AWIM program, and being able to inspire them to think that if they're interested in it, there's a great opportunity for engineers and other types of involvement outside of engineering, maybe project management or something similar, that they can get involved in and be a part of that future.
How are we going to get more students interested in engineering mobility? I'm going to throw in computer science there as well. Is it through mentorship programs? Is it exposure to new technologies? Is it just taking the child to the racetrack or to see a boat race? And does this come down to trying to spark something in that child's imagination that wants them to potentially explore that?
Yeah. So the way that I kind of see it, I mentioned earlier about going to car shows as a kid, and car shows really kind of, I think, was my original sparked interest in cars, but not really kind of crossing that bridge to automotive engineering. Because every car you look at a car show is absolutely beautiful, but it says you can look, but please don't touch. And for children, that's not super engaging. Most children are kinesthetic learners, so they want that hands-on experience. And I think being able to scratch that itch for audio, visual, and kinesthetic learners is really helpful. So I say, simplest things is get them involved in Legos early on. Make sure that they have the opportunity to maybe join a STEM club in elementary school, middle school, or even high school if it's an opportunity, so that they can really think about what they want to do for a career and what's really going to bring them joy. Because if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I think that's the best thing that we can teach generations going forward in order to make sure we have an equitable future that's going to continue to be so innovative and supportive of the innovations that we're currently coming out with.
Because that's passion. And when you have passion, you build things that change the world. Florida is that canvas for children to build things that will change the world. In your opinion, what does the future of mobility, ground, air, and maritime look like in the state of Florida?
Ooh, I would say that there's just uncapped growth available in each of the different facets. Florida is so uniquely positioned. So if you're interested in environmental engineering, cool. The Everglades is, one of the most unique ecosystems in all of the world, and everything in Florida is connected to it. If you're mechanical, you've got everything that they do in the space industry, in the maritime industry, in automotive performance stuff. It's aerospace. You can go even more in depth for what they're doing in aerospace. And it's really just, the possibilities are endless. So I'm excited. I don't know everything that could be in store there, but I think without a doubt, there's uncapped growth available in each of the facets of engineering here.
You never know. One of those childs could usher in the future of suborbital flight because they were inspired by something that SAE Florida exposed them to. Rebecca, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
I would say don't underestimate Florida. We really are a hub of innovation. And overall, I would say that the people here are very resilient. And I think that transfers over into the facets of engineering that we have here as well. It's remarkable to see what we've accomplished so far and what we're really kind of fearlessly trying out. But I'm excited to see more of what future generations have in store for the state and beyond that.
Do not underestimate Florida. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. The future is engineering. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
Thank you so much. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, please kindly rate, review, and let us know what topics you'd like for us to explore next. Be sure to join us next week to hear how Gatik is using autonomous vehicle technology to create an efficient and reliable supply chain.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.